Good morning and welcome to Coffee with Alain. As you can see, I have a special guest today. It's Barry Eisler, a New York Times best-selling author. And if you haven't read any of his books, you need to. They're fun reads. And before we get started, I want to remind everybody, Enjoy Life Safely brings you this podcast. Go there, sign up for that newsletter so you don't miss stuff on the weekends. And you'll also get notice of the Self-Defense Essentials course that'll be released later this week. But without that, let's go on and talk to our guest. And anybody who comes on live, feel free to ask questions, comments about Barry's books, and we'll get you on here too. Barry, for anybody that doesn't know who you are, can you do a brief little introduction to folks?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I brought my coffee. I hope you brought yours. My name is Barry Eisler. I'm a novelist. My 19th novel, The System, came out this past June. Bunch of short stories and unproduced screenplays too. Once upon a time, I worked at the CIA in a covert position. It sounds sexy when I say it, but it really wasn't that big a deal. Most of it was training, and it was only 3 years. I did make some good friends though, and so there's that. Plus, I had some good training that finds its way into the thrillers I write. And these days, I'm originally from New Jersey. These days, I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and when I'm not writing made up stories, which are in fact based heavily on reality and the events of the day, I've got a Substack page where I opine mostly about politics, media, and occasionally about the craft of writing fiction. Good morning.
Thank you, Barry. And Barry forgot to say that he also used to practice law, so he has that background prior to the CIA. And he's lived in different countries, including Japan. So he brings a lot of authenticity to that. I need more of my coffee too this morning.
No, you're nice. You're nice to say. I forgot all the good stuff. I mean, I remembered to mention New Jersey, but not that. And the other thing everyone should know.
And trained with the judo in Japan and different things. So when he talks about martial arts and different locations around the world, often he's been there and done that. And so it brings some of that realism to the book.
Thanks, Alan. And the other thing is, I do have. I always feel a little shy about saying something like this in front of people like Alan, but I do have something of a martial arts background going back to wrestling in high school. And I know the basics of a few things, but I'm certainly no expert. But what I think I do have a knack for is asking the right questions. And I've been lucky in knowing, getting to know some people who can answer those questions. And as just one example, I'm not a particularly good shot. I've handled various firearms, but minimally competent is how I describe it. But I know what questions to ask, and I'm fortunate to know Alan, who's a former sniper, Army sniper. So he's the kind of guy I can go to and make sure that I'm getting good information that finds its way into my books.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Barry. And I'm going to say good morning to Jay and Vicky are here saying good morning. Appreciate you guys showing up and saying hello.
Morning.
I want to talk about some of your older books too, but first let's talk about the newest book, The System. And I have a couple questions about it. And the first is, there's two parts I liked. I liked when she was on the Bright interview and just sort of creamed the guy, and even had that little Rocky interview. They don't know it's a damn show. They think it's a damn fight.
One of the best movie lines ever.
Yes. And so I loved you had that in there. And then when she is at the Congress and just giving it to them.
Yeah.
How did you come up, those two scenes and those dialogues and just having her just blast these guys with accurate information and put them down? How did you come up with that kind of stuff?
Yeah, mostly that was from my own experience. And somebody once asked me, I think I discuss things in a way, I hope I discuss things in a way that's productive. I don't really like debates. I mean, I've had plenty of experience with debates, but I've found that dialogue and discussion tends to be more productive than debate. Not that debate isn't entertaining, but I just rather would watch a boxing or an MMA match rather than, two people each just trying to win and maybe incidentally display a little bit of truth or get to a little bit of truth too. But the point is to win and to make the other guy lose. But one thing I've learned through originally through debate and now increasingly through discussion, is the way things are framed determines the outcome, almost certainly. I think the military has a term for this. They call it shaping the battlefield. So if you've shaped the battlefield properly, the battle is probably already won even before the actual engagement. And I know as a former lawyer, this is true in negotiations too. If you really do your homework and get to know the other side, again, like even my approach to negotiations was always win-win. It was always about, tell me what does your client want? What is your client concerned about? And let's see if we can find a way to get those things while making sure we get my client what she wants and what and staying away from the things she's concerned about too. So the framing is critical, and it's interesting to me how often people fall into the trap of accepting the other side's framing. Whereas if you interrupt it and reframe it, you're much more likely to get the outcome you want, whether it's winning a debate or just a more productive conversation. I can give you innumerable examples of this, but I'll just give you one because I talk about this stuff online a fair amount. As I've gotten older and hopefully more mature, my detractors might question the second part. Definitely I'm getting older, but mature, I don't know. I've become less interested in getting people to share my conclusions. People are always going to differ. We got 330 million Americans. What do you expect? They're all going to agree on the specifics of policies or that sort of thing? It'll never happen. So what I'm looking for, though, is a framework people can agree on, because the framework is useful and accurate. That's a rubric that's become important to me. I want my frameworks to always be useful and also accurate. And so if people present me with a framework that I think is either not useful or not accurate, or neither useful nor accurate, I try, not because I'm trying to win an argument, but I try to get them to accept a framework that I think is more useful and accurate. And if I can get them to accept that, then we'll have a productive conversation. We might still violently disagree about the conclusion, but at least we'll have a better conversation. Now, Valeria in the system is doing this, but she's doing it to win the debate. It'll work there too. It's funny. I remember I've been having all these discussions online, and those are the ones more in my mind than what Valeria does when she's on Cliff Bright's show. But if you look at what she's doing in that scene, she continually interrupts the pattern he's trying to set up. She continually rejects his framework and puts in a more appealing one. And the audience loves that. And once she's done that, once she's reframed it properly from her perspective, Cliff Bright doesn't have a chance. And he's not used to that, because most people will accept whatever framework you're putting in. I'll give you a couple of real world examples of this. And again, I mention these things not because I'm trying to win an argument, but because I just, over time, have learned to recognize bad framing. I'm very much against torture. That's the conclusion. And if I bring this up online, as I used to do a lot, like in 2006 during the Bush administration, when enhanced interrogation techniques were much en vogue, I would get a lot of people saying to me, well, what are we supposed to do with these terrorists if you don't want to torture them? You're supposed to give them tea and crumpets. That was, by the way, you look for the cliches, tea and crumpets, and that's usually a sign they're just not really thinking. But my response would be, can you think of any other options for interrogating a suspect other than torture on the one hand, tea and crumpets on the other? There must be other choices. That's a proper framework. If you still want to torture people, okay, but don't frame this as though you only have these two choices. If I can't torture them, I got to give them tea and crumpets, and who wants that? And the other false framing I used to see all the time with regard to torture is, Barry, are you saying torture can never work? And that's great, because the answer for the other side, because the answer is no, you can. Of course, I'm a novelist. I imagine these things all the time. Grab my daughter, put a gun to her head and say, open the safe or she's done. I'll open the safe. Of course. Oh, congratulations, torture worked. But is that the proper framing? Are you saying it can never work? That's very favorable to someone who says, hey, quaderat demonstrandum, we have to torture. Where I think a better framework is to ask, is torture legal? Is it moral? And is it productive? Productive meaning, does it yield greater benefits than it does costs, not just strategically, but the people we're requiring do the torturing. Anyway, I just think that's a better framework. If you think like, yeah, I actually think torture is legal, moral, and extremely productive, then okay, we'll disagree, but at least we're proceeding from what I consider to be a sensible framework. Socialism, capitalism is another one where people are always like, they just want to argue in these binary terms, and I don't think that's useful. I think it's all heat and no light. My question is usually, why is K through 12 education good? We've all decided that public K through 12 education is good, but wait a minute, free college education 13 through 16, that's bad. That's socialism. I'm not saying it's not. Maybe it is. I'm just asking why is the first good and the second bad? That's a good conversation. I'm open to people. Why is publicly funded health insurance good for military veterans, but it would be bad for the society at large? There may be an answer to that. I'm open to it. I'm not trying to win an argument here. I'm just trying to frame it in a way that I think will be more productive and that we can disagree with at the end of it and still feel like we're part of the same society. We don't hate each other. We're not some kind of enemy or fifth columnists or whatever. That's what I'm going for generally. And in the system, it's a little different. Valeria really is trying to destroy Cliff Bright, and she does, because she recognizes he's trying to do the same to her. And everything I'm talking about, it's funny. A long time ago, I listened to, this is how long ago this was. This was a book on tape, or a course on tape, literal magnetic cassette series. And I highly recommend to anybody who's interested in negotiating. And by the way, even if you don't think you negotiate all the time. It's just part of life. It's called, it was called Secrets of Power Negotiating by a guy named Roger Dawson, who also wrote a great book called You Can Get Anything in Life You Want. You can get anything you want in life, but you have to do more than ask. And one of the things Dawson pointed out is that, hey, you might not like these techniques I'm teaching you because you might think they're manipulative or something like that. But you don't have to use these techniques yourself if you don't want to, but you should know that there are other people who are trying to use them against you. And I feel like all these techniques that can lead to better discussions, yeah, they can also be used to win debates if that's a thing that really blows your hair back. It's a little bit, if you think about it, like self-defense techniques. I mean, they can be used in a just way to defend yourself, your people, whatever. Or I guess they could be used to oppress other people or bully them. It's like a Japanese concept, setsuninto and katsujinken, the sword that takes life versus the sword that gives life. It's the same sword. It's all how it's used. And I just talked for a really long time. I apologize, but you said it was about coffee, so here I am.
And, I stood up real quick to go to the bookshelf because there
Oh,
is
that's why am I not surprised?
And this is the old cassette version that I've had since way back then.
That's awesome.
I keep a cassette player in the house still because every once in a while I will listen to some of these old cassette programs that I have. But I have that Roger Dawson.
That one is probably the best I ever listened to. And I listened to some other really good ones. Brian Tracy on sales techniques. There's a lot of great stuff out there. But yeah, I think Roger Dawson in that particular series was incredibly eye-opening for me. I listened to it early in my legal career, and I was like, damn, nobody ever taught me any of this stuff. Really good stuff.
I like that too. And when you were talking, it also reminded me of Urian Fisher's Getting to Yes.
Yeah.
The orange story, where, why does the kid want the orange, and asking the right questions to find different solutions. In all of my live communication classes, I ask people, we got two kids, they're both fighting over an orange. What do you do? Yeah. And nobody comes up with what Uri and Fisher say. Ask them what their interests are behind their positions.
Yeah.
You can find better solutions. And that's sort of what you're doing and talking about.
It's weird how once someone points it out to you, you realize how much sense it makes. Yeah, I think I was, when I was a lawyer, I was a contracts lawyer, did technology licensing work. And I don't remember whether this was to some degree instinctual or whether I learned it from Roger Dawson, maybe a combination. But it's been my experience that lawyers, this is true for everyone, like in this thing about where your kids want oranges and you don't even bother to ask, what is it? What do you want? Why this orange? Why not? Whatever. I was very good at setting aside the specific contractual language that everyone was fighting over, which was unacceptable. Like the other side was like, we will not accept this provision. And instead of saying, yes, you will, my client insists on this provision. What is it about this provision your client doesn't like? Forget about the specific language. What is it your client wants? What is it your client is concerned about? And then just listen. People love to be listened to. It makes them feel respected. When people feel disrespected, pretty sure this is universal among humans. If people feel disrespected, you're creating an uphill battle for yourself. You might get to the top of that hill by force or something like that, but it's going to be a slog. So yeah, just listening, just asking people, what do you want? Inherently lowers the temperature in the room, and then you may learn something. Roger Dawson's got some good examples of this, like, oh, I didn't realize, let me see. And yeah, it's nothing. Your client can totally accommodate that need, and you make progress. I know of the Getting to Yes course, never took it, but that's it to me, the thing with the oranges. Great example. And I think it's one of the unfortunate side effects of social media is that it trains people in really caustic habits. The medium itself is extremely poorly designed from the standpoint of fostering useful conversations. It lends itself to argument destruction. So people instinctively, you only got 280 characters, everybody's watching like a schoolyard fight. And so you just try to identify the weakest part of whatever someone said, maybe even invent a straw man that the person didn't say, attack that argument and destroy the argument. And you're like, ipso facto, I'm done. And the thing is, everybody knows when someone tries to publicly destroy your argument, what they're really doing by proxy is trying to destroy you. And so you get a really strong defensive reaction when someone tries that. And it devolves from there. It's hard to use social media, I find, in a productive way, although I work at it probably more often than I should. Anyway, yeah, I know we're getting a little far afield, which is fine with me. I'll talk about anything, but these are just things that I have found useful. Books, courses like Roger Dawson's, and then just practicing them as I get older and realizing, oh yeah, this is just a good way to get to a more productive conclusion, even if we still disagree at the end. That's become increasingly important to me as I watch America get increasingly fractious. And for what? I don't really understand it. It's like everybody's just yelling past each other instead of listening and trying to find common ground.
No, I agree, and that gets difficult. Yannick is here and said good morning from France, says he's a real fan of your work.
I just saw the message. Thank you, Yannick. Appreciate that.
And Jay said to make people think is always a win.
It's hard to do.
And Jay also is saying, I think he's meant as a writer, what do you like? A drafting form pencil? I'm not sure exactly what you're asking there, Jay, for 100%.
Jay, it's funny. You'd think I can give you a short answer, and I never do. But what I'll say is this: I work on a word processor. I mean, when I take walks, I come up with ideas or working on a plot or characters or whatever. I'll often just talk into the dictaphone function on my phone, then type those notes up at home. But whenever it comes to actual words on a page, I work on a word processor. That said, I get a lot of questions about my process, which I think is good, actually. I think anything you're trying to do, it's smart to ask someone who's already doing that thing successfully, hey, what do you do? What's your process? And I always frame my responses with Bruce Lee's dictum that you should absorb what is useful, reject what is not useful, or discard what is not useful, make it uniquely your own. So I like a word processor, and that means working on a word processor is an example of something that can work, because it does work for me, but it might not work for you. People ask me about outlining. Where do you get your ideas? What do you do? I take a lot of walks. I don't do very well when I'm sitting still. I need to move around. I think that a lot of people have that experience. Walking is really just connected with deep thinking. I don't know why. But if you, I'm friendly with another novelist, Tess Gerritsen, and I'm pretty sure Tess has said that she lies down on her couch, looks at the ceiling, and that's when she gets her ideas. And I wouldn't say like, what, Tess, you're doing it wrong. That works for her. God bless. So I think, get a lot of examples, try different things, find what works for you, like Bruce Lee said.
That's a great answer. And it's so funny because when it comes to writing, everybody is so different.
Yeah.
Don Aslett, who was a favorite author of mine, he wrote a ton of books on a yellow pad. and with a pen. And I remember when I like to get up early in the morning personally. Like this morning, I woke up at 3:50 without an alarm, and I was working
That's not early. That's late. Late at night.
And I was working on a PDF. It's about 40 some page PDF that's going to be part of the self-defense essentials course. It's going to be a added bonus in there. But I remember talking to Lee Child. I met him one time at an event. Boy, he doesn't get up early. He gets up later and has his coffee and cigarettes and writes and such. I mean, So everybody has different ways they do that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. The process isn't the point. You just got to find the process that works for you, I think, in all things.
Jay said, still trying things. I understand, still trying things. Thank you, Jay. Appreciate that. So the other question I had, and you sort of touched on it, I think, with what you were talking about. You have all these different characters, the John Rain, the Docs, Livia Lone. Why all of a sudden, boom, this book, the system, completely different from anything else that you really have put out there. So why this book and why now?
Well, I would only say I wouldn't call it completely different. I like to say it is different. I like to say it's got all the sex and only half the killing. So there's some overlap. But I think the milieu of the system is different. And my wife Laura's also my literary agent. We talked a lot, and even in the early stages of just finding the story and the characters and the milieu and that kind of thing. We were aware that there was going to be a marketing challenge because, and the way we identified, sorry, I hate this. I got to get some Bluetooth earbuds, but I find they're not as reliable. Anyway, on the other hand, they won't have a wire that gets caught between my chair and my back. The way we identified the marketing challenge is this. I was pretty confident I could write that the system would be a worthy book. Whatever you think of my other books, people sometimes ask me, how would you rate your books? And I say, it's not really up to me. I personally would say they're not shit and they're not Shakespeare, somewhere in between, and readers will have to decide for themselves. But whatever my level of quality is, we knew the system, Laura and I knew the system could be that level, but we recognized it was going to be different, as you say, in probably the following respect. It would be less driven by action and killing. There is some killing in the book and some near escapes from a contract killer, and there's even a quick counter surveillance advice that one character is giving another. So it has these elements in common, but it's just less driven by this kind of stuff and more driven by the ghosts of the characters' pasts and their personalities, their characters, their worldviews, that kind of thing. And so I'll give you a quick example of this marketing challenge in action. My brother Alan's almost always one of my beta readers, and I gave him the manuscript when I thought, okay, this is getting good enough, it's tight enough and refined enough to start showing to other people. And he texted me, and he's like, I'm on page 50. Where's the violence? Where's the killing or whatever? And I'm like, yeah, this is the thing where people, if they're expecting a John Rain book where it's very much punctuated by combat, unarmed combat, action sequences, that kind of thing. I've misset people's expectations, and that's always dangerous. I got to give you a quick humorous example when I learned the lesson of how important it is to set expectations. I was in Japan some years ago, not when I was living there. This is on a business trip, staying at a hotel. Went down to the breakfast buffet, a little bit jet lagged and whatever, not paying close attention, I guess. Just getting my breakfast, and I took some fruit salad and put it in a bowl, and then some plain or vanilla, I didn't know the difference, yogurt, and put it on top of that. Found a table, grabbed a spoon and took a mouthful. I was like, ugh. Well, the problem was it wasn't yogurt I was putting on my fruit salad. It was creamy Italian dressing, and I just wasn't paying attention, so I didn't notice that. And I like the story because I realized there were probably a bunch of Japanese standing around me like, why is that gaijin pudding? These people have the weirdest taste. It's disgusting. And they're probably still telling that story about, no, you got to understand that gaijin, oh, they like Italian dressing on their fruit salad. But I realized, oh, that's interesting. I like creamy Italian dressing as much as the next guy. I like fruit salad a lot. But if I'm expecting something that tastes sweet and I get a mouthful of creamy Italian dressing, I'll spit it out. So all experiences are like this. If you think about it, you get cued the music at the beginning of the movie, and you go into the movie already knowing a bit about it. Is it a drama? Is it a comedy? If you don't know, then it takes you a while to get into it because you can't find your almost like your emotional footing. So we did a lot to make people understand the system's a little different. It's got these common elements, but it has some differences too. Where did it come from? Which is your question. I'm sorry, that was a big digression. Um, I'm really interested in politics, but not just politics and geopolitics, but politics and geopolitics as expressions of human nature. I've been studying this stuff pretty closely since I was in college. I was a psych major. I never even thought about this before. I was a psychology major, and that was mostly because I was just interested from an early age, just like what makes the humans tick. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do in this world, and I had to declare a major, and I'd taken some psych courses just because I was interested. So I thought, I got this many credits, I might as well be a psych major. But by the time I graduated, I was taking a lot of history courses, some literature too, but really a lot of history courses. And it was only just now that I realized, those are aspects of the same interest you have. If you study people across cultures, you can learn a lot about the humans, as my system character Monty Cranston calls them, because you can start to see what are the differences, but what are the commonalities. Like I mentioned respect a little while ago. I've never encountered a culture. I've only lived in two, Japan and the States. But I've dealt with a number of others, and it's hard for me to imagine that there's a culture where people like to feel disrespected. There's just no way. What is respect? That will express itself in a lot of different ways across cultures, and it's fascinating to see the way what is considered respectful will manifest itself differently across cultures. But there's no culture, I'm pretty sure, where it's considered a good thing to disrespect other people, where that achieves favorable or beneficial results. So I find that kind of thing interesting, and that's across cultures. But then if you look at history, for me, the whole point of studying history is, or the primary point anyway, is to see patterns. We don't recognize what's going on in the moment it's going on. We're caught up in it. But if you look at history, you start to see, oh, this thing has happened before again and again. And yeah, maybe it doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme, that sort of thing. That's why you study history, to get perspective on your own moment, so you don't make the same dumb mistakes that your forebears have made because they didn't recognize the patterns. Anyway, these two things for me, like psychology and history, I wouldn't say they're two sides of the same coin, but they illuminate the same topic. So these are longstanding interests of mine, and they express themselves in all my books, but never more than in the system. And I think the combination of those interests and the fact that I felt confident after 18 previous novels to write a novel that I felt would be compelling in its own right if it were driven more by the characters. I didn't have to rely so much on, what Raymond Chandler said, like, if you ever lose your way in a novel, just have a guy with a gun kick the door in. You can't really do that and have it be good. That's not really, it's got to be coherent and integrated with the entire story. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. It'll be gratuitous. But the less action you have, the less genre, the fewer genre elements, I think the more skill it's going to take as a novelist to keep people compelled. Because in a way, like if you write a story where there's a ticking bomb under Los Angeles, a suitcase nuke, these are very high stakes. You've got millions of lives in the balance. And you can rely on that to a certain degree to carry the story. Your characters are still going to have to be compelling or people won't care. We're wired to care much more about who than we care about what. Or to put it another way, we're wired to care about what only insofar as we care about who. That said, though, if the what is really big, that can carry you for a bit. But to write a story where the stakes are really personal, I mean, nobody else is going to get hurt, really, if things go badly for this character. Those characters are going to have to be very well drawn indeed, because they're going to have to carry the whole story. And I think it wasn't until recently that I felt the confidence as a storyteller to do that. And again, my detractors might say, yeah, Barry should have stuck to the extra killing or whatever. And that's fair. I personally love the system. I think it succeeds. Hey, don't take my word for it. Those customer reviews on Amazon have been really favorable, I'm glad to say. So people, I think, get it. But that's where it came from. I felt the interest was there. I felt the story was there. I wanted to show the way the American system really works as I see it. And this was my attempt to try to pull the curtain back dramatically and to show the system for what it is and to show what it does to the people within it, to the people who think they're going to enter into it. I've got epigraphs for every one of the 63 characters and plus a 64th that opens the book itself. And there's one of them from a writer I like, Caitlin Johnstone, who says, "You don't change the machine changes you." Or that's one of my epigraphs. The other one is Nietzsche, better known. When you stare into the abyss, when you gaze long into the abyss gazes back into you. And so I'm trying to show that. Valeria Vela is my protagonist. She's an idealist. She wants power, but for good reasons, ideal reasons that would benefit ordinary Americans. But to exercise power, you have to become part of a system. You can't exercise it all by yourself. And as you enter into that system and start to try to get control of the gears and levers of that system is doing things to you too. And that's Valeria's story. And yeah, I should stop there because I'll get into spoilers. Plus my answer's been too long anyway.
No, and I agree that, and I like the system. I mean, again, I thought it was very different from your previous books, but I really enjoyed it. And I like that aspect that, yeah, when you have an ideal, but when you're part of that system, it changes you, and it's going to change anybody.
Inevitably. Yeah. And you know who did a great job with this actually a bazillion years ago? Stephen King. If you want to see what we're talking about here, but just in the framework of a single story, one of the things I loved about his novel, The Shining, which I read when I think I was 15, I think I was in 8th grade. So however old you are when you're in 8th grade. Everybody knows the story, but very briefly, Jack Torrance, a playwright, he's kind of desperate. He got fired from his job. He's struggling with alcoholism, and he winds up getting a gig just being the winter caretaker of a hotel. And he's working on a play, and he thinks it's going to be the great American play. And if he stays in this hotel for the winter with his wife and a small son, it'll give him time to finish the play. And at the outset of the play, when they get to the hotel, his protagonist is the schoolboy and his villain is the headmaster of the school. But as the hotel is working on him and his worldview starts to change as a result, he starts to see his own characters differently. Like, that kid is really a little snot nose, isn't he? A little brat, spoiled brat. And, the headmaster, yes, he's harsh, but does not this child need some discipline? Is not the headmaster meting out this discipline ultimately for the good of this child? Starts to look at everything differently. And I see this, I've dealt with this in another context in all my books to some degree, but it's more central to the system. I see it in our politicians all the time. And I ask myself, what happens to these people? Did they start this way? And sure, some of them, I'm sure, but not all of them. And I would even say not most of them. Power, there's a saying for it. Power corrupts. We all know the expression. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Everybody thinks they can handle it. And by the time they've actually got that ring in their hand, they're like, my precious. And they never let go. So there's a reason we have a gerontocracy, and these people never spend time never resign or retire to spend time with their grandchildren. I mean, their grandchildren probably don't want them. They're so corrupted at this point. But still, can you imagine? Some of these people are almost 90 and they don't even know what day of the week it is, and they just won't stop. Where does that come from? They didn't start this way. And if you'd asked them at the beginning, do you think you'll retire at a certain appropriate age when you feel you've done the good you've set out to do? Every one of them would say, and they'd pass a lie detector saying it, oh, yeah, I just want to accomplish some good things and then make room for the next generation. And by the time, it's my precious. And you can't get rid of them. So something happens along the way. And that process really interests me. And for anyone who's a writer here or trying your hand, there's a saying I've heard. You could say it's a cliche, but sometimes cliches have a lot of truth in them. When you write a detective story, it's not just about how the detective works the case. It's about how the case works the detective. That's going to be good fiction, I think, the best kind of fiction. It's not, sure, it could be a compelling whodunit. And if you're really good at that stuff, maybe the characters don't matter that much. But the good stories, really the best stories, the ones that illuminate some aspect of human nature and that stay with us, yeah, while the detective's trying to solve that case is affecting the detective. Those are the things we respond to in the deepest way, I think. Something's going on with these incredibly shitty rulers we have. And the system is my attempt to understand some aspect of what that might be.
No, that's great. I want to say good morning to Dixon. Dixon said, howdy from Texas. Apologies for missing the start. It was a time change through me. And he says he agrees best to be a history buff to avoid looming mistakes society has made in the past.
Yeah, it would be nice, wouldn't it? I mean,
unfortunately we keep redoing them often.
Yeah, it is dispiriting. And as far as history goes, it's interesting to me. This is an example of how I try to frame things. I do have a very strong set of opinions about the war in Ukraine, but leaving those opinions, those conclusions aside for the moment, it interests me to see that almost all the historical framing of this conflict is Chamberlain Hitler appeasement Munich. It's never anything else. No one ever refers to any other previous conflict. It's always World War II. I'm sure if you scour the internet, you might be able to find an exception to what I just said, but you'd have to work to find it. Whereas everything right in front of you, from ordinary people as well as elites, it's all Chamberlain Hitler appeasement Munich appeasement. And I question that. I find that interesting. First, because I usually respond to people who are doing this. It's like you can't appease aggression. I just saw Mitch McConnell, who's one of these people who I'm sure doesn't know what month it is. I don't know who's writing his tweets. The guy can't even stand up. And I'm not, by the way, I'm not being partisan here. Nancy Pelosi, what are you going to do? Anyway, Biden, don't get me started. So, yeah, I know, really. I mean, I just try to call these things as I see them in a nonpartisan, non-tribal way. But anyway, it interests me that that this thing is always framed as World War II because, one, if you only frame things as Hitler appeasement, then you've done one of these things where the framing leads to only one possible conclusion. Well, you have to fight. You have to fight. This is Hitler all over again. And what are you going to do? Then you've already built in your conclusion. You've caused it. So what I usually say to people is just, can you think of any other historical analogies that might shed some light on this conflict other than World War II, which is the one everybody always reaches for? For example, have you thought about World War I, this interlocking series of alliances and a world war that nobody wanted, but things kept happening that culminated in the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. And then the series of domino alliances just started falling over. And you had the absolute tragedy of a horrific global war that nobody even wanted. And what about the Cuban Missile Crisis? Do you know anything about that one? Yeah, actually, the Soviet Union put nuclear missiles in Cuba at the invitation of the Cuban government. This was all perfectly legal, no violations of international law. Each sovereign nation had an absolute right to do what they were doing. Can is not the same as should. Was it a good idea? If I were Khrushchev's friend, I would have said, my sense is the Americans aren't going to react well to this. And if you were like, well, I'm not doing anything wrong. This is legal. I know, Nikita. but you're going to get a very bad reaction. And he did. And the Kennedy administration actually implemented an illegal act. They put a naval blockade. They cleverly called it a quarantine around Cuba, but a naval blockade is an act of war. So in response to the perfectly legal actions of Cuba and the Soviet Union, the Kennedy administration committed an act of war against both. In that sense, you could say the Kennedy administration were the bad guys in this conflict, but good guys, bad guys doesn't interest me that much. I'm more interested in what the humans will do. If you do X, the other tribe will do Y. I don't care who's right or wrong. This is what's going to happen. And if you know this about the tribes, about the humans, which my character, Monty Cranston, calls basically a bunch of monkeys who've learned how to talk, then you'll think less in terms of what you should do or what you have the right to do, and more in terms about what's probably going to happen if I take certain actions. And what I learned from World War I and the Cuban Missile Crisis is it's probably a bad idea for a foreign military alliance to continue to expand over the course of 30 years, all the way to the borders of an adversary, and to become on the verge of incorporating the country that is the most sensitive country bordering that other country. At some point, you're going to get an aggressive response. That's what history shows me. The actions of my own country. This is what I learned from it. And even if you still think at the end of my little speech just there that, no, it's actually Chamberlain Hitler Munich appeasement. Okay, but at least maybe you're in a position where you can think about why it's nothing like World War I and why it's nothing like the Cuban Missile Crisis. The last thing I'll say about this is it interests me. I love Orwell's novel 1984 for a lot of reasons. And one of the things that I like about the novel and that I think needs to be understood is the concept of newspeak. Newspeak was the government's attempt to dumb down the language, to continuously remove words from the language with the end goal of making certain concepts literally unthinkable using the language. And when I look at how so many ordinary Americans know nothing of history, or at least they have no frame of reference anyway, other than Chamberlain Hitler Munich appeasement, it feels deliberate to me. You don't have any other tools. You've got, just like with Newspeak, it's literally unthinkable to you. You can't think of it. You can't conceive of it. That maybe a conflict is something other than World War II. Maybe there's been a lot of human history other than World War II. Maybe to some degree this is done on purpose, because if every conflict is World War II, what does that mean? It means you have to fight every conflict. And by the way, if anyone's curious, Google New Hitler or New Hitler. You won't believe how every single new U.S. adversary is actually Hitler or worse than Hitler. Saddam Hussein was worse than Hitler. Gaddafi was worse than Hitler. Milosevic worse than Hitler. Even Noriega was worse than Hitler. That's a lot. Noriega was worse than, really? Certainly Putin is the new Hitler. China's President Xi is Hitler. They're all Hitler. Something's going on here. I thought Hitler and the Nazis and the Holocaust was a singular historical evil. Apparently, Hitler's everywhere. Something's going on with that makes my teeth itch. You should be skeptical. Okay, I keep saying last thing, but this is short and it is the very last thing. Where do these views come from? The views expressed in the system. Here's where they come from. I try to derive my political views from what I think of as first principles, a foundation that's built on my understanding of human nature. My understanding of human nature could be all wrong. You can dispute it. That's fine. I'm always happy to talk about things like that. But I try very hard not to adopt by osmosis some view of human nature. It's like left or right or in group, out group, or whatever. I try to look as hard and dispassionately, as carefully and dispassionately at what the humans do and what makes them tick as I can, and derive my politics from that. And it's been my observation that a foundational principle of politics that you have to understand or you're going to get bad results is this. As George Carlin put it, your rulers, what he calls your owners, they don't care about you. They don't care about you, as he says, at all. It's a painful thing to accept because we're talking about mommy and daddy. These people have all this power over us, and to accept that mommy and daddy don't love you, they don't want what's best for you. You're actually a resource to them. To the extent they're not ignoring you, you're a resource. They might eat you if they're hungry. That's bad. It's an uncomfortable truth. But if you can accept that, then so many things start to make sense. But if you don't accept that, if you think these people are really on your side and they just want what's best from you, you're going to be endlessly conned into increasingly worse results. Anyway, that's what I try to do with my politics as I express them in the system. It's not a left-right presentation. The word Democrat, the word Republican doesn't appear in the story, even though it's said in Congress. I'm trying to show about what the humans do in this system that governs our lives. That's the book.
Oh, and that's awesome, Barry. Thank you. And Jay mentioned, what about the American expansion west and the treaties with the native nations? Just another framework to look at and Jay also saying education is the key.
So Jay, that one I'm going to push back on, and I'll tell you why. I guess it would depend on the kind of education. I know with Laura's and my daughter Emma, we made it a point. I was pushing this a little more that as she grew up and went into school, I would have her watch George Carlin videos with me. Because I said, look, you're going to learn good and useful stuff in school, but they're going to pump your head. They're going to inculcate you with a bunch of nonsense too. That's a huge portion. The purpose of education, at least that's what George Carlin and Noam Chomsky both said, and it's been my experience that it's true. So I said, this guy's going to counteract that, okay, and give you a kind of antidote, but make up your own mind. But you should get this this countervailing view. And the reason I question the notion that education is key is because so many of the best educated people I've come across are also the least thoughtful. Something's going on there. Like there's a guy, he's a former American ambassador to Russia. He teaches at Stanford a few miles away from me, Michael McFall. One of the best educated people you could ask for, I think. And he teaches a course at Stanford. And he's functioning at the level of someone who knows absolutely nothing of history or of human nature. Timothy Snyder is another one like this. This is an eminent historian. I see his tweets and it's nothing but Chamberlain, Hitler, Munich appeasement. What's the use? He knows I think he's a historian. He must know there was something in human history other than World War II, but he doesn't access it. He doesn't do anything with it. So education, knowledge is to me a tool, but how you're going to use the tool is everything. And you can get around this conundrum by saying, yeah, and I wouldn't disagree, Barry, it's the nature of education. If we teach better critical thinking, if people paid more attention to Noam Chomsky than they did to whatever their elites are bloviating, or if they paid more attention to George Carlin, we'd probably get more thoughtful people. I wouldn't disagree with that some. But the thing about the humans, and this is another thing where I try to, part of the foundation I try to build on, we are primarily emotional creatures. We're capable of logic, but logic is mostly deployed by humans retroactively to justify an emotional conclusion we've already reached. That's its biggest purpose, its biggest function. Logic, the biggest purpose and function of logic in human affairs is to justify the emotional conclusions we've already reached. So if you give people who are going to do that anyway more knowledge, you're just giving them better tools to justify their existing positions. You won't actually change any conclusions. I don't know what to do about this, by the way. Not exactly. I mean, better education, I guess. I did it on the micro level, rather, with my daughter by saying, I'm going to give you a head start with a contrary view from a guy who I think was an incredible free thinker, hilarious, of course, but always with a view of human nature and systems and education and elites, and a nonpartisan, non-tribal view of the world that will definitely provide at least an alternative to what is supposed to be injected into your head by some kind of osmotic process in school. I guess that's the best we can do, is just to try to find alternatives. But as George Carlin himself said, elites don't want that. They want you to be just educated enough to work the machines and fill out the paperwork. Is he wrong? I mean, why would our owners want you to be able to actually do some critical thinking and realize what a raw deal you're getting and how war really is a racket? that's not my, well, it is my conclusion, but don't take my word for it. Take the word of two-time Medal of Honor winner, former Marine General Smedley Butler, who wrote the book, short book, worthwhile book that nobody seems to know about, called War is a Racket. He would know. So if you want to learn these things, education can actually make it worse. I guess we just need a different kind of education.
No, that's a good point. Although then your daughter still did go off to an Ivy League school.
It's funny, and I wouldn't say she regrets that exam exactly, but she realizes that she learned a lot of stuff both in the classroom and out of it. But looking back, she recognizes there are other ways that you can learn about the world. And it's funny. I think the best way to understand higher education in America, and I say this as a guy who himself is Ivy League overeducated. I went to Cornell for undergrad and I stayed there for law school. And I was lucky in my Cornell experience in a couple of different ways. One is I made a set of some of the best friends I'm ever going to have, three guys I live with. And 40 plus years later, we're still super tight and love those guys. And I also happened to meet some really good. I had some really good professors. Walt Lefebvre. I took all his history. Every history course he took, he taught. I took, and so that was again. I read all his books, and he became a friend, lifelong friend, at least for his life, because he died a few years ago after I graduated. So it's not like it was a total waste. But when I look back and I look at the experiences I've had outside of college and the things I've learned since then, and the interest I've always had, but that I didn't really know, and it almost got covered up by the notion that I had to go to college and like that was the way you got educated and all that stuff. It's not healthy in a society, I think, for everybody for the prevailing ethos to be, well, you need this education, it'll make you a better person. Where it's an important credential, no question. It'll open various career doors for you that would remain closed if you didn't have the college education, and particularly an elite college education. I wouldn't dispute that. Like certain kinds of jobs and opportunities you want, yes, it's going to help you for that. But the notion that it's really going to open your mind in some way, it's supposed to, but is it really? That didn't very much happen to me at college. It happened living abroad, and it happened using the internet in a good way, I think, when I started encountering a lot of people who were talking back to establishment media. And then I realized, there's really, there's a lot more to this stuff than what I'm getting from the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Atlantic Monthly, New Republic, Foreign Affairs, Foreign Policy, all these magazines and newspapers and publications I used to read religiously. And then I realized, whoa, this is all a pretty establishmentarian worldview that I'm imbibing. There's something more to this. None of this stuff happened to me when I think of as my intellectual puberty. None of it had, or very little of it had to do with higher education. So I would prefer to live in a society where higher education is treated as something that is important for certain career paths. I wouldn't want to be operated by someone who hasn't been through the process of higher education, including medical school. But for understanding the world, being a productive member of society, I think there are a lot of good and better ways to get to that point than just a college education. But I don't know, maybe there's a lot of money in that racket, and so we're stuck with it.
And I agree. I mean, I think living and traveling overseas broadens so much. And I think everyone should have to do that. And I was so glad that, Wharton and Penn provided my daughter opportunities.
Yeah.
I mean, all 3 summers she has been in Korea and other countries. Did the internship in Korea, did the internship in Singapore, the semester, and then she traveled to a bunch of different countries. And I think she probably has learned and gained as much from those as the classrooms there in Philadelphia.
Yeah. It is an incredible experience to live abroad, I think, especially if you're open-minded. And I'll give just one quick example from when I was first living in Japan, which was a long time ago. This is 93 to 94. And at the time, I had a pretty typically American view of things. Like, I'm not blaming myself for that. I mean, I'm American. I'd never lived anywhere other than America. So there are things that are cultural artifacts that we don't realize are cultural artifacts because we're just we're eyeball deep in them. Like they say, the fish doesn't notice the water it swims in. It makes sense. And so when Laura and I first lived in Japan, my notion was, oh, the Japanese just don't. How can they be so silly? They actually limit the amount of square footage a retail establishment can have, and so they can't have big box stores like Walmart, which is such a shame for Japanese consumers because Walmart has lower prices and better selection, and they'd all be so much better off if they could have that. And there's some truth to that, but we lived in a little neighborhood in Tokyo called Sengoku. We were the only foreigners, or at least the only white foreigners, or like foreign-looking foreigners in Sengoku. I did that, by the way, because Sengoku was put the Kodokan between our apartment and my office. And so I had to pass through the Kodokan subway stop every night on the way home from work, which made it convenient for me to be at the Kodokan 5 nights a week and Saturday mornings too. That was the whole plan. But no, all the gaijin lived in the west of the city. We were on the east. Turned out to be a great experience. Anyway, the experience I had coming home at night from the Kodokan was I had to stop at a couple of different mom and pop shops because that's all the neighborhood had. I mean, really small mom and pop shops. Stop here. If you want to buy fruit, that's one place. If you need to pick up some meat or something, that's another place. You ran out of dish soap or what have you, that's another place. And all these places, I knew the owners by name. They knew me by name. There's this really lovely thing of when I'd get there, come in, they'd say, "Okaeri nasai." That's how you greet someone. Like when your husband or wife walks back into your house at the end of the workday or whatever, gets home from work, "Okaeri nasai," like welcome home. It's such a lovely thing. They're like, "Welcome back. You're home in the neighborhood." And it occurred to me, this is such a nice way to live. It's not for everyone. It's fine, but I really enjoyed it. And then I started thinking about, it's like, hey, everybody knows everybody else. I started thinking about, oh, by the way, the prices were higher and the selection was lower. Okay, granted. I started thinking about Japan's famously low crime rates. And I wondered if this thing where everybody knows each other, there's really no anonymity in the neighborhood. And if a stranger comes into the neighborhood, people notice you're not from here. Could that have anything to do with the low crime rates? And it just broadened my horizons. Again, you don't have to come to a conclusion here, and I'm not asking anyone to. You don't have to say, no, low prices and better selection are an imperative and nothing else matters, or lower crime and everybody knowing each other and having this convivial feeling in the neighborhood. That's the only thing that matters. It's not that. It just made me realize there's actually a method to what I thought was madness, and there's a trade-off, and different societies will weight these different factors differently and do the trade-offs differently. And it's wonderful when you start recognizing things like that. It leads to so much mutual respect, and you can learn from other cultures, and maybe other cultures can learn from you without you preaching to them, because it's so interesting. You can approach each other as equals and say, oh, you do it that way. That's so cool. I never thought of that. We do it this way. And maybe they'll say, never thought of that either. And then maybe you come up with some sort of synthesis or refinement that's better for everyone. By the way, this is why I hate this notion of cultural, what do they call it? Cultural
appropriation.
Thank you. Appropriation. I was trying to think cultural stealing. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, shouldn't we learn from each other? And it seems like such an honor to a culture. Like the fact that judo is done all over the world. I feel like that's such an honor to Japan. Should we not have judo in America or Europe or wherever? And Japanese are baseball fanatics. I'm like, are they appropriating our national sport? That's wrong. I'm like, what an honor that is. Or Japanese, they love single malt whiskey. They've got single malt whiskeys that win competitions that beat even Scotch whiskey. Man, I'd like to be the guy who's judging those competitions, but whatever, I'm stuck writing stories. But like, is that cultural appropriation, or is this someone discovering something from another culture, falling in love with it and seeing if they can refine it or put their own take on it? How could that possibly be a bad thing? I mean, maybe if you don't credit where you've learned it. I'm big on crediting the people I've learned from. So, okay, but that seems like trivia compared to the whole notion of cultural appropriation. Like you shouldn't. I don't even know what the world would be. We'd all be living in little isolated spheres and never. It'd be so tragic not to be able to learn from other people. Anyway, sorry for getting up on my soapbox.
I'm going to do a couple comments, but I want to say, I agree because, lived in Japan right after you. I was there 94, 95,
Yeah,
lived in Korea with the military in the 80s and then
yeah,
in the mid 90s. And I always felt Americans aren't better. You see these Americans that come into the foreign countries and they think we're the best and
yeah,
all this is subpar.
yeah,
And I always thought I'm living here. I'm going to be mixed with them, learn from them,
yeah,
be one of them.
yeah,
And I had experiences too. I can remember in Korea with the military, I had a place off post and I'd
yeah.
be walking home, little tiny restaurant, and say, I'll come back for chop chop bop. Okay. And then I'd go change clothes and come back. They'd have it ready for
It's
me and
nice.
stuff. And just, mom and dad, little pop thing.
It's wonderful.
And I had those experiences in a little place I lived, Shocho in Japan. You knew the people because it was
Yeah.
just a real small little community.
Yep.
And I wanted to blend in and be part of them,
Yeah.
not be better because I wasn't better.
Yeah. And it's just a bad way to look at the world. We're really good at some things, and other people could learn from those things, maybe, but we're not the best at everything. We can learn from other people. Sometimes I joke that when it all went wrong for America was when they gave us the international dialing code #1. Like we're like, yeah, and I'm like, no, it's just a convenience, all right? Or probably they're just trying to make you happy because they know you want to think that way. But yeah, living abroad is a great way. You just start to realize, the saying, it's not the things you don't know that get you in trouble. It's the things you know that just ain't so. If you think you're not afflicted with things that just ain't so, you haven't really, you haven't done a lot of consideration, and maybe you haven't lived abroad that much. Um, you might have, Alan, you might have seen I posted something on social media a day or two ago, and you would know where it came from. What I said is, a former military intelligence friend of mine once told me something that I thought was a really good rubric, so I'm passing it on. And this is, he told me his commander would say to him, first tell me what you know, then tell me what you don't know, now tell me what you think. This was Slug, who I learned that from.
Okay.
And I think that's great. And it's amazing to me how many people start with the third one and never even get to the first two. And if you open your mind and you stop thinking that you know it all and that your culture is the best and all this kind of stuff, it's amazing how much you can realize how much you don't know. What you don't know, all of us, I'm talking about myself here, obviously, too. What you don't know is vast compared to what you do know. Just recognizing that much should induce a certain degree of humility and openness. But it's, I guess, not really how we're wired to recognize that. You got to work at it.
Right. I want to do a couple comments. Dixon was laughing about the geriatrics, and he says they have no business in politics. Despite the sageness of their age, the cognitive stability has to count for something.
It would be nice. You'd think. Yeah, the Constitution. Sometimes I laugh that the Constitution has minimal age requirements for elected office, and really it should be maximal ages, or at least both. But that in response to Dixon, there's a saying in science. I don't know very much about science, but the saying is science progresses one death at a time. Because what happens is somebody makes a big contribution, and then at some point that person will get sclerotic in his or her thinking and is no longer able to contribute, but rather just maintain the status quo. I'm sure there are lots of exceptions to this, but in general, finally that person is gone and some radical new approach becomes possible. My God, if that's the truth in science, why would it not be true in politics too? We apparently we got all these people who still think it's World War II and Hitler, Chamberlain, Munich appeasement and whatnot. But yeah, I agree. George Carlin, the thinking man's comedian. In fact, there was an article, for anyone who likes George Carlin, who's just curious about him, a few years ago, there was a terrific HBO 2-part documentary about his life. He was an extraordinary person. And I remember the New York Times had an article about him asking the very interesting question, why is George Carlin's comedy so often cited? Why does he continue to have such an impact on the discourse, where there are comedians of yore who I personally think are still very funny? Rodney Dangerfield, just to use one example that just popped into my head, or Sam Kinison. These guys to me are still hilarious, but they don't get cited the way George Carlin gets cited during discussions, arguments, political stuff. There was something about his comedy that made it apparently evergreen and extremely broadly applicable. And whatever that thing is, I think it's worth considering.
He was definitely a genius for sure.
Yeah.
You know, Robert also said about those tiny shops having so much character.
For sure.
And Dixon asked about the gun culture in Japan.
Well, I wouldn't say first of all, I'd say I'm not really that much of an expert about this because it's not something I really looked into when I was in Japan. I can tell you that guns are very strictly regulated in Japan. Their murder rate is extraordinarily low, and their gun murder rate is probably lower than that. That's about as much as I can tell you. Other than this, to go back to how do you frame things to have a good discussion. When I talk about what's commonly called gun control. By the way, I wonder who named that. I feel like somebody who named gun control, they must not have wanted whatever the ostensible goal of gun control was to succeed, because it's the worst marketing you can imagine. I mean, nobody likes to be controlled other than maybe self-control, but then I'm doing the controlling. You know, self-control we think is a good thing, but anyone else, like the government controlling you, what do you want the government to control? Nobody wants the government to control. Birth control is good, but you get to use birth control or not. That's up to you. Nobody wants the government to control something. So it's a terrible name, and as I say, it's not useful, but it's also inaccurate. What we're really talking about here is gun regulation. That's a much more accurate and I think useful framework. By the way, I have huge respect for an adherence to the Constitution. The Second Amendment says what it says. As a former lawyer whose job was to draft contracts that would be clear and unambiguous, and insofar as possible would obviate litigation by being clear and unambiguous, I got to tell you, it must have been late at night. They must have been exhausted, whatever. The Second Amendment is not well drafted. It just isn't. They don't connect these two thoughts. Like a well-regulated militia is important. The right of the citizenry to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. It's like, but there's no there's no attachment. They're two quite different concepts, and you're left to try to interpret the connection. That's just not good drafting. I say that with great respect and even reverence for the geniuses who otherwise did such a great job drafting this thing that served us well for a quarter millennium. But I respect the Second Amendment. I actually own firearms, and I just wish the way people could approach this topic were more. Look, nobody really thinks that you should be able to keep and bear any arm. I don't think. I don't think anybody says, yeah, I mean, if I want to own a shoulder-fired Stinger anti-aircraft missile, that's an arm. I mean, I should be able to I don't think anybody really says that. Or Claymore devices or suitcase nukes. You know, how far out there do you want to get? And probably nobody would say, like, yeah, I think anybody who wants to bring a gun into a courthouse or a courtroom or an airplane or whatever should be able to do so. So then I'm like, look, then we're talking about a question of degree. In California, the state government has outlawed ASP tactical batons. I think that's going a little far. Like, really, what's somebody going to do? A mass killing rampage with a stick is crazy to me. That to me is disarming the citizens. Saying you shouldn't be able to own your own Claymore devices, I think I could probably live with that. I won't feel disarmed. I think I can, handle my crime concerns and even the zombie apocalypse concerns adequately. So it's one of those things where it's like, all right, we framed it well. Where do you think we should draw the line? What do you think is reasonable? What is it you want? What is it you're concerned about? Like you're negotiating a contract. And even if we disagree at the end, we can shake hands and feel like we've respected each other, and we can get to I see where you're coming from. I don't see it that way. I don't agree, but I understand where you're coming from, and you feel respected now because I've tried so hard to understand you, and vice versa. That would be good for society. So anyway, I wish we could stop calling it gun control and stop talking about death cults and
I know
all that nonsense.
When I first saw that, the gun culture in Japan, really, there isn't one. I mean, they just they don't really have, not like America. And I remember so many Japanese telling me, America's such a dangerous place.
It is statistically. I mean,
and comparatively, the crime and so forth. Yes, they had a point.
Yeah. So, and this is the kind of thing where I would never say like, oh, and ipso facto, eliminating all firearms is the way to go. It's worked in Japan. And there are counterexamples. We should look at the counterexamples and see what we can learn from them. That's all. Yeah, the last thing I would say about Japan in this regard is they do have enthusiasts, gun enthusiasts there. And I know like there are shops where you can buy replicas and they're into the replicas. But as far as going to a place and, and blowing off some rounds, I don't, there may be such a place. I never encountered it. So strictly regulated for sure.
And it was funny because I lived there when the sarin attacks happened in the subway. Yeah. And I was actually in the subway where it was the day before.
Yeah.
But when that happened, I told all the Japanese I was working with, Japan's such a dangerous place. And they're like, no.
Yeah, it's another thing we're not well wired for, and I don't know enough about it to have too meaningful an opinion. But I've seen enough studies that show that humans are not very good at accurately assessing risk. We downgrade certain risk that we should take more seriously, and other risk that's almost non-existent where we give it too much weight. I think I can see lots of examples where that's true. But statistically speaking, it's sort of funny when I hear establishment bloviators like Van Jones saying things like, how did he put it? Iran is a weird country. And I thought, well, weird how? Are they exceptionally violent? Because they haven't invaded anyone since the Persian Empire. They just haven't. If you want to come up with exceptions, you could say, they back Hezbollah and Hezbollah's at war with it. It's okay. But how many countries have they outright invaded? Not that many. What is their murder rate per capita? It's nothing compared to America. And I'm not trying to say Iran's better, America's worse, or vice versa. It's not my point. It's just kind of weird. The stuff that goes into the brain of a person like Van Jones and then comes right out his mouth without any consideration. What does it mean that they're the weird ones with their relatively low violence rate? Is that really weird in the world? Or, in fairness, is maybe America the weird one? You could use a word that's not so loaded as weird. You could say atypical, for example, outlier, something like that. But if you look at rates of violence, street violence, domestic violence, compared to screen out actual war zones, and America is like, we're number one. We're the atypical ones, not, at least in this regard, it's not Iran. What can we learn from that? I don't know. Nothing, I guess.
Right. Richard said hello and said great conversation and thanked us. Robert, we responded.
Thank you.
Dixon also said that's a big problem nowadays, the lack of agreeing to disagree.
Yeah, I agree, and I think we can improve the ratio with better framing. Because if all people are talking about, whether it's two lawyers over the specific provision in a contract, or two people shouting at each other online, one is saying socialism and the other is saying capitalism, and they don't even try to define their terms or figure out what the hell they're talking about, then yeah, how are you going to disagree? It's some, or if you think like, Putin caused this whole thing and he's Hitler. And I'm like, I don't know if I want to risk nuclear war over the question of who rules the Donbass or whether NATO gets to admit its 33rd neighbor or member nation or whatever. How do you discuss anything? It's Hitler. We're done. How do we even agree to disagree over Hitler? It's these non-useful, non-accurate frameworks, I think, are part of the reason it can be so hard to agree to disagree. We don't even understand the actual nature of the disagreement.
Good point. Mark was here and said when the Second Amendment was drafted, we didn't have a standing military as we were broke and didn't even have a functioning monetary system. The well-regulated militia hails back to Valley Forge.
Yeah, I've read a lot about this, and I'm no kind of Second Amendment expert. My only point was I don't, as I'll say, as a former lawyer, I've taken constitutional law and I've drafted and negotiated and reviewed more contracts than anybody ever should have to, and I know what is good contractual language or even good instruction book language and what is confusing instruction book or contract language. And the Second Amendment, like somebody should have just been there with those guys. I'm not blaming them exactly. I know sometimes what happens is everybody's exhausted and they just can't fix this last problem and they just have to get the job done. And one side is like well-regulated militia. And the other side is like right to keep and bear arms. And and they just can't bridge the gap. So they just put the two in, and they're like, you know what? We'll let everyone else figure it out in future generations, which is what's happened.
No, good point. I mean, I want to do a couple of questions about the books. Will we be seeing her again?
Will we be seeing Valeria Velez again?
Will we be seeing Valeria again?
Yeah, I hope so. That's what I always say to Laura when she says, man, you're going to be 62 in January. And I always say, if all goes well. She's
Right.
like, stop saying that. Like, I don't like to take anything for granted. Yeah, I would really like to tell more of Valeria's story. And the way I see this book, I've been wrong about this kind of thing before. I thought my very first novel with John Rain was a standalone, and now there are, I don't know, 10 Rain books, and it's expanded into this whole killer collective universe. So what do I know? But the system is one of the it's not an epigraph, but one of the things that comes up in the story. My character, Monty Cranston, who I've mentioned a few times in our conversation, he's very briefly, Monty Cranston is something of a savant. He's somewhere on the spectrum, but he has startling insight into human nature. But individual humans are somewhat opaque to him, and he becomes an advisor to Valeria, helps her on this journey she's on through the systems, the subsystems that comprise American power. And he says something to her that I learned from a friend of mine, a guy who works at Amazon, who I met through Amazon Publishing, who said a journalist once, or maybe it was a PR person, I can't remember, and it's sometimes hard to tell the difference. It shouldn't be. Once said to my Amazon friend, and then I learned this from him. He said there are only three kinds of stories in the world: the rise from obscurity, the fall from grace, and the comeback. And I really like that. Is it a little oversimplified? Sure, maybe, but it's a great framework. And this story, the system, is Valeria's rise from obscurity with all sorts of challenges, obstacles, hopefully near-death experiences, literal and figurative, until we get to the end of the story. I should say quickly, the story opens. She was just elected to Congress. And in a couple months, she'll be sworn in. That's where the story opens at her victory party. And very quickly, I know it's hard for me to do that, but for anybody who wants to write fiction, people talk about the inciting incident. It's a very interesting question at where should the inciting incident be? What is the inciting incident? And so you might say, like, oh, this is a rise to prominence story, the rise from obscurity story. So then the inciting incident, she was just elected to Congress, right? And the answer for my story is no, that isn't. That's already happened. She's already been elected. The inciting incident happens at the end of chapter 1, where the Pentagon announces it's going to move this huge weapons program, the Next Generation Air Dominance Fighter program, out of Air Force Plant 42 rather, and I'm forgetting 44, it doesn't matter, in Valeria's California district, over to Texas Plant 4. And thereby put 5,000 of Valeria's constituents out of work like that. What you're going to do now, how you like us now, because Valeria has spoken out passionately against the military-industrial complex in America and how we're going to stop stuffing the maw of the military machine. That's really the inciting incident. That is the thing that forces her to take action. Just something to keep in mind about what has already happened that is necessary for this story, but isn't what starts this story in action. The thing that starts the story in action is the thing that knocks the world out of kilter and forces your protagonist to take some kind of action, to go on a journey, to solve a problem, to reset the world, whatever it is, but such that the only way through this story now, or to the end of the story, is through it. That's your inciting incident. So now Valeria's already been elected. That's how the book starts. And it ends with her first session in Congress after many, many different setbacks and obstacles and all that kind of stuff. And the thing you talked about earlier was a moment of, I don't want to say, for anybody who's going to read it, but it ends with her being sworn in, and it's her first session of Congress. That's the first act of 3, as I see it. Think of 3 acts as beginning, middle, and end, or as the rise from obscurity. And the second book, as I see it, would be the fall from grace. And then the third book would be The Comeback. It's very high level, but I envision her story this way. All of it being a dramatic depiction of the inner workings of American power, real American power, by the way, which to me is partly the politicians, of course, but we're also talking about obviously Wall Street, Silicon Valley, the arms industry, the energy industry. These Wall Street, this is where power is actually exercised in America, and these are the power centers that our rulers actually serve, not really the people, not so much. Anyway, so that's what I'm trying to depict here dramatically, and also how being within this system affects character. Like how does a detective work the case, but how does the case work the detective? And to really take Valeria to the end of that story, I think 2 more books.
Nice. We got something to look forward to. Mark mentioned that he's a history buff when he was talking about the Second Amendment. So
yeah,
we got a couple books to expect there. But how about, we have John Rain, we have Docs, we have Livy alone, by themselves, together. Are we going to be seeing them some more?
Yeah, I get asked that a lot because I think certainly my best-selling book ever was The Killer Collective, which was if you want the rough and ready guide to understanding the way these books have taken shape, not by conscious planning, maybe or something's going on in the back of my brain. It's a little bit like the way the Marvel Cinematic Universe rolled out. Well, the MCU started with Iron Man. I think then, I don't remember exactly, but then there was Captain America, I think, and then a Thor movie. And you could see where this was going. There was always a little vignette at the end of each movie. And pretty soon you have the Avengers. And then you have all these different mashups where it's not exactly Avengers. It's mostly a Thor movie, but the Hulk is in there or whatever. That's what I've done in all these books, but not with superheroes, but with assassins and rogue cops and black ops soldiers and that kind of thing. And the Killer Collective was the first total mashup of all my characters. And that is, for me anyway, I don't want to speak for anybody else, but that is a really, really fun story. And yeah, I did have to live in Paris for 3 weeks writing the whole last third of the book, which happens. I know anything from my art. What can you do? And yeah, I really love writing those books. And here's a thing that I learned actually from writing the mashups, which again, I think sort of obvious in retrospect, but I think it's good advice for anybody who's if you're writing your own stories. This is what makes good scenes between characters, and which is, I would even say, is necessary if you're writing like a buddy story, a bromance, a kind of Lethal Weapon story or anything like that, or a big mashup like the one I've done or the MCU. Your characters have to be really different from each other. And by really different, I mean they have to have different goals, different priorities, different worldviews, different styles of getting what they want. And when you put force them maybe to characters like these together, it'll all just crackle. The dialogue will crackle, their interactions will crackle, and you can get something really fun. And I think I feel stupid saying this, but some of what I've learned of craft, not all of it, thankfully, I've learned from trial and error. And when I got done with the Killer Collective and saw the response to it, I was like, you know what this is working so well? Because Rain is so completely different than Docs. That's why those books well. But then you got Larison, who's they call the Angel of Death. This guy is very dangerous, but he's dimensional. That's another thing. This one I learned from screenwriting, storytelling guru Robert McKee. Dimensional means having a kind of opposite quality within the character himself. So Tony Soprano is a bit of a sociopath. It's very hard for him, maybe impossible for him to feel compassion for other people, and he's a killer. But he loves animals. He feels so deeply for animals. What's that about? Well, it's about something, but it can create a quite interesting character. So I got these dimensional characters, but their styles and their goals and all this kind of stuff are so different. Put them on the page together, and great stuff just starts to happen. And so that's just something to keep in mind. If you've got your characters, are they dimensional, and are they really different from each other in all those different respects? Those are the mashup books that I've written. I think, I don't know, probably at least 10 of those, probably more. I've written more mashups at this point than I've written, because each new book, I think it's going to be a standalone, and then it winds up in this overall universe. Like The first Trevin book with Ben Trevin was Fault Line, and then there was Inside Out. So that was still a Trevin book introducing Daniel Larison. And then those guys intersected with Rain and Docs in The Detachment. And then I wrote Olivia. I think I'm getting mixed up now, but then I think Livia Lone. She's a Seattle sex crimes detective who's not just who, when she can't punish a sex offender or put him in the ground, that's fine too. Then there was Livia, and then The Night Trade was the next Livia book, but Docs winds up in that book. And then All the Devils is another Livia book, but Docs is in there. And then The Killer Collective, it's Livia, all the Rain characters, Livia characters, the Trevin characters. Then another standalone was The God's Eye View, introducing Marvin Manus, my deaf contract killer, bear of a man, who I something I learned from Tim Larkin. This is Manus's approach to violence. He just feels like it's going to work. He's just going to work. It's just destruction. He's not passionate about it. It's just something that needs to be done. It's a job, get it done. That's Manus, but touch his family and God help you. Then he winds up joining this overall universe in The Chaos Kind, which was my biggest mashup yet. So I don't know. The next book, for anybody who's who stayed with us for this long and is curious, is another Rain prequel. And this will be the third Rain prequel. The first was Graveyard of Memories, set in 1972. And then there was Zero Sum, set 10 years later in 82. This one will be set in Tokyo and environs 1989, when the asset bubble was about to burst and the Ushiniwara, the Junin, the lost decade was about to begin. Right, like at that hysterical moment when the land under the Imperial Palace grounds was worth more than the state of California. And there's this crazy moment in Japan. That's where the third and final prequel, I'm pretty sure, though I've been wrong before, is going to be set. And the reason I think, what conceptually high level, first book is the story of John Rain's rise from naive CIA bagman, former special forces soldier, competent guy, combat veteran. But this was how he went from naive bagman to fledgling assassin. That's Graveyard of Memories. And then Zero Sum was the story of how he went from fledgling to master. And I think of this new book, for which I don't have a title I'm going to announce yet, because I'm not sure if you don't want to lay down any prompt, but anyway, it has a working title. This is a last chance for Rain to escape the wheel of fate. Spoiler alert, he can't escape it, but it's a great story anyway. And my model for this story, for any Trevanian fans out there, is one of Trevanian's smaller books, but what I think of is arguably his best, The Summer of Katya. Arguably, because Shibumi was, if for anyone who knows Trevanian, I mean, Shibumi, God bless, so good. But Summer of Katya is a really different kind of book. It's a small story set in the Basque Country between the wars. It's beautiful. It's just beautiful. It's a love story. It's a mystery, and extremely. It's beautiful and really dark, and that's kind of how I think this one is going to feel, with romance and killing and all the things that we've all come to love about John Rain's universe.
I haven't read that one. I mean, I've read Shibumi, and wasn't Satori a follow-up to Shibumi?
Yes, Don Winslow wrote Satori, and I thought it's a prequel, and I thought it was a really good imagining of, who was Nikolai Hell before we met him in Shibumi.
Yep. So good. We got a lot of good stuff to look forward to. I mentioned the other day, because I'm putting the Street Fighting Essentials DVD footage into the Self-Defense Essentials online course. It's some of that footage. And I mentioned how I got a review one time, a 1-star review on Amazon, and it said, "This is not a book, it's a video," which was clearly in the Paladin Press description. But you had a unique review on the Killer Collective. You want to share that?
That was a great one. Let me just say very quickly, to the extent I can say anything very quickly. My position on customer reviews is it's your opinion, and vaya con Dios. I don't argue with them. Almost never. I have received, the only time I respond is when on those occasions I've written 4 short stories, and I really am at pains to describe in several different places in boldface, several different ways. This is not a novel. It's a short story. It's all over the book cover. It's in the jacket copy. It's in the little description in boldface that goes next to whatever on the Amazon page. Short story, short story, short story. It'll say this short story is about 15,000 words, about 30 pages if it were paper. I mean, I don't want anybody to buy anything of mine and then feel like they didn't get what they paid for. Why would I do that? It would be so. Sure, it would be cheap and cheating and all that stuff, but just think of it from a self-interested standpoint. I've got an unhappy customer now. Why would you do that? I caused you to buy this thing that's not what I caused you to expect it was. That would be insane behavior. So no. So what I do on those occasions where someone's like, this story was only like 30 pages, man, I say very politely, because you got to have some practice with this. Don't be insulted. Don't let your ego respond for you. They meant this in good faith. They felt righteously aggrieved. And the proper way to approach this, in my opinion, is I say, hey, thanks for giving the short story a try and for taking the trouble to review it. If you look at the jacket copy and the book copy, and I cite them chapter and verse, I said short story here and here and here and here, because it's very important to me that nobody mistakenly buys something of mine thinking it's X when it's actually Y. Why would I do that? To make 50 cents on the royalty and get a 1-star angry review in exchange? That doesn't make any sense. I never want anyone to be misled. So if you have any ideas for how I could cost effectively, more clearly and accurately communicate that this is a short story and not a novel, please let me know. I would love to do that to lower the chances of anybody making a mistake. And almost invariably, I get a response back saying, you know what, I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention. You're right. And I'm like, no, it's all good. By the way, then you don't have to hate each other after this. And I don't have to feel aggrieved for the rest of my life that somebody didn't understand that it was a short story and reacted as people, or overreacted as sometimes people do. But yeah, the one I got that I did actually put on social media just because I thought it was funny. I'm not complaining. You could, if you like my books, give them a good review. If you don't like them, say whatever you want. It's fine. But this one was funny because the book is called The Killer Collective. And I think it was a 1-star review. And the guy, all he said was, this book is positively brimming over with killing. And I said, come on. I'm like, come on. It's called The Killer Collective. And then somebody said, maybe you misunderstood the complaint. His complaint was like, you promised lots of killing. Like it should have been boiling over with killing. And he found that it was merely brimming with killing. And that's what he was saying. I was like, oh, that's a good point. Maybe that was it. I had, by the way, one other experience of this in my life. Ages ago, when the movie Gladiator, not Tony Scott, Ridley Scott movie was in theaters. So that was a while ago. Laura and I saw it with 2 friends. And when we came out, I said to this couple I said to this gal, Marcy, hey, what'd you think? And she said, there's a lot of fighting. I was like, she wasn't trying to be funny. I mean, this is like saying there's a lot of sex in a porn movie. I'm just like, did you not see it's called Debbie Does Dallas or whatever? Like, I don't, what and then my question is always, okay, what could they have done to more clearly communicate to you right there? It's called Gladiator. What did you think it would be about? An accountant? So anyway, that one, the Killer Collective, positively brimming over with killing, or rather, this book is merely brimming over with killing, 1 star. I thought was pretty hilarious. And one more very quick bad review story. My absolute favorite that I've ever gotten, partly just because I still don't understand the impulse behind it. It was actually a 3-star. And the review said, I don't remember which book it was for, but it said, this book is okay. And there wasn't even a period at the end of the sentence. And I thought, why? If you hated it, you loathed it, it disgusted you, yeah, then you feel strongly. Give it a 1 star. God, I hated this book. It sucked. I understand that impulse. Or I loved it, 5 stars. But this book was okay. And you can't even, the whole thing exhausted you so much. You couldn't even just hit that period before you uploaded it. I was like, I just want to know, who's this person? Is that? What caused you to do this rather than something else with your time? That was pretty funny.
Yeah, you can't figure people sometimes. That's for sure.
Every world, every person a universe, every head a universe.
Well, Barry, we've gone about an hour and a half, so I'm putting your website up here,
Thank
barryeisler.com.
you.
Where else can people find you? Or is that the best place to go, barryeisler.com?
It's a good starting place. If you go to my website, you'll find links to everywhere else you can find me online, which is Twitter or X, whatever it's called, and Facebook, and my Substack page. Substack's my long form commentary on geopolitics, media, propaganda, and occasionally some articles and videos about the craft of writing fiction.
And all the books available on Amazon, best place to get them, or your local bookstore, or
Amazon is definitely the best place. I'd like to say, well, my local bookstore would be Kepler's in Menlo Park, California, and yeah, they've got all the books autographed. If you want an autographed copy, Kepler's is definitely the place to go, and they'll ship books too. But if if you live outside the Bay Area at this point, you want to be sure the book is stocked. Probably you're talking about Amazon.
And when I was reviewing your books, I mentioned the original books had title changes on some of them.
Yes.
And so, but you were also very clear on the titles that this was previously published as.
That's another one. I get the same, and I feel bad. I always hated the titles of my first 6 books, and I was not able to choose the titles I wanted. For the first couple, I didn't know better, and by the time I did, I didn't have enough control or clout with Penguin Putnam, which was publishing my books at the time. When I got the rights back, that's a separate story. When I got the rights back to those titles, I wanted to give them titles that I felt resonated with some important sellable aspect of the story. What my publisher had been doing was naming them interchangeable things, rain this, rain that, as a kind of pun, because my character's name is John Rain. So I had rainfall, rainfall, hard rain, rainstorm, killing rain. And I was getting, people would email me and they're like, what's the next one? Raincoat, rain check, haha. I'm like, oh, if I only had $1 for every person here, But those titles had absolutely nothing to do with those stories. And the stories are not interchangeable. You can read each of these books as a standalone. They're designed for that. I don't want anyone to feel like, well, I got to start with number 1 and go through all 6. But there is a trajectory to the books so that if you read them in order, you'll see that what happens in one book affects the character, his outlook, his priorities, and everything else in the next book, which in turn affects the plot and on and on. But you can read any one of them and it'll work entirely well as a standalone, by design. So to name them something interchangeable that had nothing to do with the specific stories just didn't make sense to me. They're not those kind of books. So I changed the titles. This is many years ago at this point. I think almost 15 years ago. And I really tried so hard to communicate when I changed the titles. We had new cover art. On the cover art, it says formally entitled whatever, like Rainfall is a Clean Kill in Tokyo. Formerly titled Rainfall. Jacket copy next to says the same thing. Author explanation for why I changed the titles. I don't want somebody buying one of my books twice. What do I make on that transaction? $1 or depending on paperback or digital. I would hate to be that kind of person on just an ethical level, but also you'd have to be it's even worse than unethical. It's idiotic, because I would just be creating an army of people who feel like I ripped them off. How's that going to help me long term? So I did communicate it as clearly as I could, but I still, every now and then, I'll get an angry, you rip me off message, sometimes as a 1-star review. And I always respond to those people politely, just like, this is why I changed them. And I actually do wish I'd appreciated the risk a little better at the time. I thought if I communicated the change the way I did, that if you'd said, do you think nobody's going to make a mistake? I would have said, no, not nobody. I mean, it's a big world, but I don't think it's going to be many people. But more than a few did wind up buying the book twice. And I feel bad about that. All I could do is respond politely. saying I did. Look, whatever happened, you weren't ripped. I did not deliberately rip you off. Otherwise, why would I put the message in all these different places? And I'm sorry that the mistake happened, despite my efforts. You can return the book to Amazon, get a refund. It's a little bit of a hassle, I know, but I'm sorry for the mix-up. That's all you can do. Was it worth it? I don't know, kind of, because I feel like I really hate that anybody could make a mistake. But on the other hand, I'm really proud of my books. Doesn't matter what anyone else thinks of them. Everyone has a right to, no book is for everyone. But I am really proud of them. I put a lot of myself into every single book I write. And if they're paintings, if you think of them that way, put a painting in the wrong frame, and it really detracts from the impact of the painting. And those titles are the frame for my paintings. And I just look at them and I'm like, really? Hard rain, rainstorm, killing rain. I'm like, you're killing me. Give them titles that make some sense. So anyway, that's why I changed the titles. And
I'm glad you explained it. And I had the same deal with Paladin. Publishers, what some people don't understand, publishers have the power and not necessarily the author.
Yeah, until Stephen King, different story. And then at some point in between, you'll cross into something where you're getting a little more Stephen King-esque, albeit not Stephen King.
But they subtitled my Hapkido Cane DVD set From the Dojo to the Street. Yeah, and I was like, no, Hapkido's Korean, it's dojang.
Yeah.
And Paladin told me nobody knows what dojang means. They know the word dojo. And so I have Korean martial artists saying, why do you have dojo?
Yeah, and some will even feel insulted. And you know what? This is one of those things where if everyone could take a step back, and probably Paladin couldn't, their concern is valid. Nobody knows. It's like not enough people know what that is. It's a valid concern. Your concern was valid too, and proven by subsequent events. You got to find a third way or some other way that addresses both concerns. I don't know what it would be. The Academy, off the top of my head, that's not quite right. But then you search. Say it again. Sorry.
Training hall.
Perfect.
From the training hall to the street or something like that.
Why not? Yeah. So Paladin, in my mind, made a mistake there. You solved all for one problem and ignored the other instead of coming up with a solution that would have minimized problems in as many directions as you could have. Yeah, it's frustrating when that happens. The time I became determined to get more control over these things was my first 4 books, my Rain books, the Rain This, Rain That titles. The sales were not entirely flat, but not growing the way anyone would have wanted them to grow. And for my 5th book, I did this monster book tour because I realized I got to do something. I wanted my career to grow. This is all the way back in maybe 2005 or so. So I went on this insane book tour, inspired by the activities of my friend, the novelist Joe Conrath, who is even crazier when it comes to book tours than I was. Nobody's as crazy as Joe, at least about this stuff, and in various other ways too. But Joe did a 500 bookstore book tour one summer. And I wasn't able to cover quite that much ground, but I did about 350 the summer for my 5th book, which at the time, my publisher, Penguin Putnam, had called The Last Assassin. I begged them to stop calling it Rain This, Rain That. And finally, we'll call it The Last Assassin. But I did this monster book tour. Drove my car from the West Coast to the East Coast, zigzagging sort of across the north of the United States, and then back across the South, 11,400 miles. Big uptick in sales, like dramatic change between the first 4 books on the one hand and the 5th on the other. Now, who knows? There are a lot of variables. This wasn't a scientific experiment. We did change the title from Rain This, Rain That to The Last Assassin, which is a cool title. I think I might have proposed that one, actually, but in retrospect, I realized it's a cool title, but it has nothing to do with the book, other than that there's an assassin in it. But he's not like the last assassin or anything. He's just, he's an assassin. Penguin Putnam got the notion from this. And also, it's my 5th book. It's not my first 4. You're building an audience. Hopefully, your audience is built in. They buy the book. They tell a friend. At some point, you can break out. But you've built that foundation. The house can be built higher now. So who knows what variables were in play. But Putnam got it in its head that that's it. Assassin in the title. That's the secret. And so they said, we're going to call your next book, your 6th book, it's so stupid. I came up with stupid alternatives. I want to remember the actual thing. They wanted to call it The Quiet Assassin. That's what they wanted to call it, The Quiet Assassin. And I had to send them this very Dale Carnegie letter, like, okay, I hear where you're coming from, like respect, the Last Assassin. Now I'll have The Quiet Assassin. But I said, I'm concerned it's not a sufficiently interesting title. And here's why. It's because we expect our assassins to be quiet, don't we? I mean, it's not as redundant as, say, the lethal assassin would be, or the deadly assassin, because if you're an assassin, you certainly will be lethal and deadly. It's part of the job description. But we expect our assassin to be quiet. And so if you're saying something that we already expect, it's like something we already know. It's not interesting. Contrast with Margaret Atwood's title, The Blind Assassin. That gets your attention. You're like, I didn't know an assassin could be blind. How would you do that? Maybe you'll take a closer look at the book now. That's the goal. Redundancy is just boring. Your eye skips right over it. So, it could be the silent assassin. That's maybe even worse. And then this was Joe and I was just ranting to him about how dumb. I'm being too harsh. My publisher was just like, it was an ID fix. I don't want to say they were being dumb. They were being dumb in this one instance, or thoughtless. Doesn't mean they're globally dumb. But it was very frustrating to me because they're going to put my beautiful painting in the wrong frame. So I was ranting to Joe, and he's like, well, wait a minute. Why don't you call it Sudoku's hot now? Call it the Sudoku Assassin. If it's not going to have anything to do with the book other than an assassin anyway, call it the Sudoku Assassin. They'll sell bazillions of copies. And I'm like, Joe, stop, forget it. He's rolling. He's like, wait. The Da Vinci Assassin, because the Da Vinci Code was super hot at the time. He's like, you're going to be huge, the Da Vinci. And the thing is, he's not wrong exactly. Like, if assassin's a magic word, attach it to something else that has nothing to do with the book, and we'll make a mint. So in the end, we were able to compromise on Requiem for an Assassin, which still has nothing to do with. The word Requiem is just one of those words that has inherent resonance for me. It's kind of cool. Requiem for an Assassin. What would that mean? I don't know. So it's a cool title, but it had nothing to do with my book. And I don't want to. This is back to my thing. It's got to be useful and accurate. Was Requiem for an Assassin useful? Probably. Sales were certainly strong. That was the first time I hit a bunch of bestsellers, like the Wall Street Journal, I think, in the Washington Post. But it wasn't accurate. I want all my titles to be both. So when I got my rights back, I changed that one to The Killer Ascendant, because this is Rain, who's tried to suppress that killer inside him, and he's living uneasily, but still, with his lover Delilah in Paris, and he's trying to put it all behind him. And then Dox gets grabbed by Rain's enemies, Dox's enemies, and it's like, kill these 3 people by natural causes. You're the only guy who can get away with that, or we'll kill Dox. And Rain he's just rocketed back into this persona, this life, this mentality that he tried so hard to live behind. This thing inside him that he's been trying to control and suppress, and it just comes ferally to the fore. That's really the heart of the story. It's The Killer Ascendant. So that's what the 6th book is called now. For anyone who misses the Requiem for an Assassin title, my apologies. I'm going to tell you one very, very quick anecdote, because it's a Keanu Reeves anecdote and it's funny. 10 or so years ago, Keanu Reeves was attached to play John Rain in what would have been a television series. It didn't work out, but I got to spend a little bit of time with Keanu Reeves, who really is as lovely a guy, at least in my limited experience with him, as his reputation has it. He's funny, he's nice, he's gracious with everyone. He's really impressive in the way he uses his star power. He doesn't use it, is the thing. He's actually at pains. Again, this is just my little bit of time with him for what it's worth, but he seems always at pains not to play that card, to play it down and just make people feel comfortable. Anyway, while all this was going on, he once called me, and I picked up the phone in my office, which is kind of my office is across from the master bedroom suite, which has a tub, and Laura does a lot of work in the bathtub. So she can hear me, or I can hear her. We can't see each other. It doesn't have line of sight. So she hears me talking to someone. I walk into the bathroom, and I go, "It's Keanu." I'm just talking to Keanu. Anyway, during this funny, improbable conversation, he's like, "Why'd you change the titles, man? I like those titles." And I'm like, because they were so interchangeable. People don't even refer to them. The books are color coded. They're like, "Oh, the red one was my favorite book." No, I like the yellow one. I'm like, when they start referring to your books by the cover color, it means the titles are forgettable and something's wrong. Anyway, that was something I articulated in that funny and improbable conversation with the lovely Keanu Reeves, who would have made a great John Rain, but
he would have. I mean,
work out.
The John Wick character and the John Rain character have some similarities there for sure.
Yeah, I could understand that. Somebody pointed out, I mean, there's a lot of differences too, but still, he's playing like a formidable assassin in the John Wick stories, and John Rain is, of course, that too. Somebody also pointed out that Keanu Reeves has played so many characters named John, and it's funny, when it all got listed, I was like, dang, something is going on here. I have no idea what it is.
real quickly, because we do need to wrap up, but
Yeah.
since you brought it up, are there any film thing? I mean, that one didn't come through. Are you still working or hoping, or is there anything?
Yeah. In July, we did, Laura and I did a new deal with Apple TV. And it's not just for the Rain books, it's for all my books except the system, because at least for now, the system is the only actual standalone character who hasn't wound up, crisscrossing with these other characters. Um, and the development companies that are involved, the development companies that brought the property to Apple are called Pure Fiction and Seesaw Productions. Pure Fiction is the company behind Shogun, which I loved. I don't know, you don't have to love it. I personally did. I love the book, and I love the recent television production. And Seesaw is the company that's behind Apple's show Slow Horses, which I think is an incredibly well done adaptation of Mick. I'm forgetting the British author's name. Sorry, this is what happens when you get older. Of this guy's books, and it's just one of the best shows on television now. Apple's doing a lot of really great stuff. So I feel like there are some really talented people behind this with a strong track record. And of course, Apple Studios itself is great news, because usually you put together elements and you hope at some point a studio and network distributor will engage with the project. And we're already there. So now it's a question of finding the right writers, creators, and other attachments such that Apple would greenlight an actual production. It's exciting. Obviously, I really hope it'll happen, but I have been to this rodeo a few times without the hope for results. It's, I think, important to recognize every step of the way that statistically the odds are long. And what happens is, before anybody's even, like, you write your first book and maybe you get some factotum of a factotum inquiring whether the rights are available, and you go that route. And at that stage, you're at like you got maybe 1 in a million odds, and then something else happens and you get to 1 in 100,000, and so on. At this point, with Apple and the other backers of this project, I think, how can you really calculate, but it might be fair to say that we're in the 1 in 20 zone now, maybe 1 in 50, probably no worse odds than 1 in 50, but 1 in 100 at worst, but maybe even 1 in 20. But what does that mean? Like, when you have 1 in 20 odds of success, that's just not good odds. That's nothing to start getting excited about. It's so you can get distracted by, yeah, but I started at 1 in a million. And I'm like, I know, but every step of the way, the odds are still against. So that tempers my optimism. That said, it is unavoidably exciting to be part of this process. What does that mean right now? It means Apple and this guy Tom Winchester, who's spearheading the development. Tom is with Pure Fiction. They're considering certain writers now, some of whom have written some of my favorite shows, and it is exciting to imagine some of these people interpreting Rain and his universe. See where that might lead. But again, the odds are against, so I try to just try to focus on the things I can actually control and make happen, which would be my new books.
And that's awesome. And I know, I mean, we talked about this decades ago, about film possibilities, and I mean,
it's been going on for a long time. Yeah,
it's a long process, and I know it has its ups and downs, because I remember when Keanu was first attached, possibly, and that was like, wow, that
was pretty exciting. And that's the thing to understand. Like, and by the way, it wasn't just Keanu; it was Chad Stahelski and David Leitch coming right. They were in post-production on John Wick. Chad is a fan of the Rain books. He also is determined to bring Shibumi to the screen. I really hope he'll manage, because that story, it should be told, probably in a television series, but whatever. Chad reads a lot of fiction, and he really liked the Rain books. We got together at some point, and he's the guy. He knows Keanu because he was Keanu's stunt double in the Matrix movies, and they got friendly and did a lot of work together. And then at some point, Chad, who was a second unit guy, that means he and David Leitch, they had an action stunt coordination filming company called 8711 that did work for some really big movies, MCU movies, and others. Chad wanted to, and David wanted to direct their own thing, not just always be second unit, which is a hard move to make, as I understand it. Chad brought my Rain books to Keanu and said, you could play this character, or I would direct whatever. And Keanu was like, yeah, let's do it. So then those meetings started to happen. One thing led to another. Keanu got attached to play Rain, and I don't even remember who the production company was. They bought the rights, and it was rolling. We had a trip to Japan for 5 days to scout locations and all that stuff. It's too bad it didn't work out. It was a very fun 5 days. They put me up at the Ritz-Carlton in Tokyo, and my job was to take Keanu Reeves, Chad, Dave, and a couple other people to all of John Rain's favorite places in Tokyo, which coincidentally are my favorite places in Tokyo. And it was really fun and enjoyable, and what a crazy, improbable adventure. But it didn't come to pass. And I'm like, okay, if a project with Chad and Dave weren't quite then what they have since become via the success of the John Wick movies and everything else they've done, Atomic Blonde and Bullet Train and all their other movies. But still the word was out on John Wick, and these guys were being looked at as the next big hot action directors, and Keanu Reeves, and even that project couldn't make it to the finish line. Then you just got to recognize that the odds are always long. A lot of things could go wrong, any one of which, if it does go wrong, then probably that's going to be that. So, as the saying goes, only time will tell. But it's fun. It's cool to be here. And maybe they'll actually get her done this time. Fingers crossed.
Well, I hope so. I think it'll be a great, I was talking to Dixon before, who's saying, maybe those should be on the film. What do you think? And I said, yes. And I think the television format where you could have that longer story, just like they did with Shogun, making it that where it's just couldn't put that in a 2-hour film the way they do in those series. I think with your books and characters, that format could really be cool.
I think that's what you'd want to go for, especially if you're thinking about building it out, which they are into. Right. If you want to think about television, it's like The Defenders, where they did, Netflix did, I think Luke Cage, or was it, I don't even remember anymore. No, it was Daredevil came first, and that was Daredevil, Jessica Jones.
Then Jessica, Luke, and then
Luke Cage, and Iron Fist, which wasn't very good. But everybody
they could have got a better they could have got a martial artist to play the character of a martial artist.
Yeah, or somebody who could at least learn martial arts convincingly for the screen, because it's probably easier to teach an actor martial arts for the screen, not to save his life, but for the screen, than it is to teach a martial artist how to act. But true. And I think my complaints were more just with the story and that kind of stuff. But what are you going to do? Not trying to put anyone down. Everyone tried. They made the best show they could, and they were still fun. Show is great.
I liked all of those. I thought they were fun, and I liked the crossover with the Defenders.
So that would be the idea. You'd be rolling out Rain, and then Livia, and then Ben Trevin and Larison, and then you'd overlap it more and more, and it would build toward an Avengers Guardians of the Galaxy kind of killer collective. And, that would be super cool. I would love to see someone else's interpretation of my characters and these worlds I built. Be a lovely payday. I never object to that. Stephen King is my model in this regard. He said long ago, I think it might have been in his nonfiction book, Danse Macabre. He said, I've never written anything for money, but that doesn't mean I've ever returned a check. I'm not crazy. Like, that is exactly. That is how I look at it too. I mean, it's great to be able to make a living this way. I don't write the books for money. If I did, I would just keep writing Killer Collective knockoffs, because that was my most popular book. But I just want to write the books that occur to me that I think will be the best stories that I'll be proudest of in that moment. But it is true that I won't return a check either.
That's awesome. Well, you have officially become the longest episode Coffee with Alain. I've gone over an hour before, but we are just about to the 2-hour mark. So
my God.
This is the longest. I won't be editing the audio as much as I sometimes do, putting up all the ums and dead spaces. We're going to upload the audio as it is to Apple and Spotify, and it'll be on the website. Want to remind everybody, you can go to Enjoy Life Safely, get on the newsletter, go to Amazon to buy Barry's books, go to barryeisler.com Bestselling.com to check out some of the other stuff Barry's doing and continues to do. Especially if you want some of his political articles and different stuff like that, you can find all that information at barryeisler.com. And I just want to thank you for coming on, Barry. It's been a great session, and I've really enjoyed, and I'm sure the listeners have enjoyed as well.
Thank you, Alan. It was really great to talk with you. Thank you.
All right. Take care, everybody. Make it a terrific Tuesday, and I'll be back to see everybody tomorrow. Won't be going quite as long, and we'll be back at the 8 a.m. time tomorrow.